Our stories are what unite us and connect us. And that is the most important thing that we can do for God, because the enemy is just trying to get in the way.
There's always a turning point, the moment that tries to break you, but ends up launching your destiny. This is Miracle Moment. I'm Ray Ireland, and I'm here to help you rise into the mission God created you for. Let's jump in.
This one thing has held so many people back from sharing their story, starting a podcast, writing a book, getting on stages, even just social media posting. And so if you can overcome this one thing, you're going to be way better off in your storytelling, in how you're showing up in your leadership, and even in growing your business. There's this idea that sometimes we need to have parts of ourselves that are private and then parts that are public. And when we start to grow a brand, especially a personal brand, and you start showing up and you're hearing, tell your story and start a book, start a podcast, there might be some frustration, some confusion around, well, but what am I supposed to share and what am I not supposed to share? Privacy is a part of your brand identity. And it's really important to actually have this boundary very clearly segmented for yourself. And that creates safety for others when they're watching and witnessing. It takes away this weirdness of, was I supposed to see that? Or what, did she mean to say that? Here's how I kind of figured out my way in this journey. And it wasn't always pretty. I definitely overshared in times. I had trauma stories. There was things that traumatically happened and I sort of verbally processed them in public. I never went so far as to, throw other people under the bus and stuff like that publicly. But even still in the little nuances, now looking back, I can see, wow, that actually wasn't really supportive to anyone, and especially not supportive to my brand or my message. But then there was this interesting sway of events that happened. Once I had recognized, oh my gosh, I have been sort of airing my laundry out publicly, then I sort of swung the other way and became really silent. And I felt scared of sharing what was actually happening, being real and being authentic. And before I knew it, I had built this brand that was very surface level. And to be honest, that was almost more painful because I felt like I wasn't being me and I lost a lot of connection and depth in my relationships and with who was coming into my world via the online space. And I remember just feeling like, okay, I don't think that's how God wanted it to be, but I also didn't think God wants me to be sort of completely polished and holding back and only showing the things that are quote unquote perfect in my life. And so there really was this interesting journey of riding the waves of what is initially exciting to share versus what are some things that I want to share that are really long-term stories. And one of the things that I noticed was really self-care was one of the most vital parts of this whole experience, because I realized when I took care of myself and I felt good about whatever I had just walked through, I was able to share from an empowered place, not from a place of needing to dump my stories or share trauma stories or even hold back because of fear of judgment or shame or guilt or any of that. It's really important to just illuminate what is meant to be illuminated and keep the rest in private. So I started really going to God for this. And I would ask God, like, really, what do you want me to share? What's going to help you? And I took myself out of the spotlight, really, and I put God there. And I said, okay, God, if this is all about you and I'm redirecting my focus back to you, I want people to find their connection point with you through what I'm sharing, then God, what do you want me to share? And it was really interesting. It was not what I thought. There were stories that God said, I really want you to share these. And they were some of my more intimate and revealing stories. And I just remember thinking, okay, Lord, you must really see me as fully healed in that space. And I got to see where there were gaps in my own healing or my own awareness of the healing. And that's when I would press into prayer. So for instance, when God really wanted me to start sharing more about my car accident again. And it had been over a decade, but I had sort of closed down that story and I didn't want to be that girl who drove her car off the cliff. I wanted to be someone else. So I stopped speaking into it. But when God really pressed back into me and he said, this is a really important part of your testimony, you have to share this, I brought it to him first. And in doing that, he cleaned up my heart. He cleaned up my relationship to the people that were in my life during that time, that maybe there was still some residue, there was still some unforgiveness happening. And he completely washed me clean so I could share that story in such a clear and non-emotional type of place. Now, it was interesting because he also told me stories that I had shared very publicly prior. He said, you don't need to share those anymore. And I remember thinking like, but that's such a good story, and I was sort of disappointed in not being able to share that. And I wondered, okay, God, are you trying to like hide that part of me or what's going on there? But what I recognized is he didn't see the need in me sharing that story, and maybe it's not yet, right? So there are stories that need processing and need time to actually continue to mature and develop, even though the story's already happened. Like I've already lived that part out, but there's this seasoning that happens when a story lives within you and it just gets to kind of sit and process within you. Obviously, I don't need to share the stories that God said you don't really need to share them anymore. But it was like I moved the emphasis and I looked at sort of like if I had two sentences and like the first one was a story that God wanted me to share. And the second one was a story that God was saying, you don't really need to share it anymore. It's like he just moved the emphasis. He bolded that first story and he made that other one a little less important. And so sometimes I would still share, but it was like there was less of an exclamation mark on that part of the thing that I was sharing. And the thing that you want to remember is as you're going through your own process with what am I going to share and what am I not going to share, just remember that it's something that you get to master over time and learn to balance, because you don't want to risk losing yourself into these overwhelming demands of like having this perfect brand and feeling empty and disconnected from what truly is going on, showing up inauthentically because you're trying to put on this presentation or this show. But you also want to be balanced and not staying stuck and holding back and just holding yourself back from the real relationship and depth that can happen when you do share. And if you're holding back, you might have a resonance with someone that's really important, that God's trying to unite you, but you haven't shared your story, so you don't know that there's a resonance there, and that person doesn't know either. Our stories are what unite us and connect us, and that is the most important thing that we can do for God, because the enemy is just trying to get in the way. He's trying to create disservice, trying to create separation. When there's not unity, he can make his way in. And so the more that we can actually become a united front with our stories and with what we're sharing, the more unification can have in the relationships that we're building in our lives as well. So just some things to remember as you're going through this process is prioritize your self-care so you can set these non-negotiable boundaries. For instance, if a story is off limits for you to share, then just let that be that. And if someone asks or anything like that, you just say, I don't really go into that.
If you're loving this conversation and it's sparking something inside of you, maybe it's time to share your own voice with the world. That's exactly why we created the Podcast Accelerator, to help leaders like you go from hidden to heard with a podcast that connects, inspires, and actually grows your business. We launched together in just a few months, and you'll have the systems, support, and strategy to keep scaling and growing. Doors are open now, so the link to apply is in the show notes. We cannot wait to see you in there.
You can have your reasons. You don't need to over-explain. If God has already given you those boundaries and given you those decisions, then that's enough, and let it be enough. You also want to have regular check-ins with, how am I doing with my speaking, with my storytelling? Am I sharing enough or am I sharing too much? And how do I want to tweak it? Just remember, you're not going to be perfect at this. You're not going to do it all right away. There's been many times where I've posted something and then I end up taking it down because I realize, ooh, that was a little too much, or, oh, that was actually a little inauthentic because I was actually going through this whole other thing that I didn't even share on. So as you do that, develop a support system for your network and what you're doing. And you'll be able to see that they're going to be able to give you reflections and let you know like what is working, what's not working, especially when you have good friends. They're going to say, that didn't really sound like you. Like, what's going on here? Versus, hey, Ray, I know you're actually going through a lot more. Like, can you share a little bit more of that? So I would say audit yourself and get a group of friends together and audit each other in the way that you're showing up and the vulnerability you're bringing to the public. If you develop that support system, you're going to be able to really find that unique space that feels really good for you. And then just reassess the goals that you have around storytelling. Like, why? Why are you storytelling? Are you telling the story because God said you got to tell it? Or are you telling the story just to like check a box and say, okay, I like did my post for today, right? All of that matters. And we want to make sure that we're not just performing to perform. To be honest, I lived that way for a long time and it did not serve me and actually led to a lot of burnout. And I think a lot of times when women especially, but also men are dealing with burnout, it's not because they have too much on their plate and they don't have a big enough capacity. In fact, I often ask God, like, continue to expand my capacity, Lord. And what that does is it helps me prioritize. If I'm doing a ton of things that aren't in my wheelhouse, or maybe they're things that God hasn't asked me to do or hold, well, I'm going to get burnt out and it's going to feel really heavy. But if I actually just focus on exactly what God told me to do and stick to my obedience, all of a sudden I feel full of energy and life and I have this connection point to Him. So that's just a really important thing to keep in mind. And as I have been fine-tuning my own storytelling, that's something that I bring to Jesus's feet every single morning is, God, let me be your servant. I'm listening. What do you want me to do? And it usually is, sometimes He'll tell me exactly what to do, but sometimes He'll tell me more of like what not to do, or He'll convict my heart of what I need to let go, what I'm maybe holding on to that is not really for me to hold to. So take that time. That's going to be my challenge for you guys this week, is to take time every single morning, just coming to the feet of Jesus and asking, hey, how can I serve you through my story? And let Him reveal to you what is going to be in support of God's big mission and big plan. Okay, so on the next episode, what I usually find is once we are kind of coming into this sweet spot of obedience with sharing our story, there might be new opportunities that are coming up for you to speak, to share. And I want to talk about the importance of your presence and how to really take hold of those opportunities that are coming your way and address the number one fear that often gets in the way and where the enemy comes in and stops those opportunities from being all that they could be. See you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Miracle Moment. Share the episode, hit follow, and join us every Thursday for prayer and activation. For more tools to rise into your God-given mission, visit rayireland.com. See you next week.